Thank you, Lauren. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, where we will be discussing how implementing cybersecurity in your organization can add to your company's bottom line. Today's webinar will be presented in collaboration and partnership with CONNSTEP, Cage Data, and Obscura. We have a lot of information to share with you. We will start with discussing the reasons for increased cybersecurity risks in manufacturing industries, how companies currently try to evaluate the risks to their OT, operational technology, and the impact an OT security incidents can have on an organization. We will talk about the hidden issues and cost of managing the OT vulnerabilities or trying to secure them, as well as standard approaches for solving the OT security challenges. Next, we will discuss a lighter approach to OT risk reduction and legacy industrial system protection. And we will leave you with some takeaways for creating a cybersecurity roadmap within your organization. And before we start, please be sure to enter your questions in the Q&A window, and we will have the presenters address them at the end of our presentation. My name is Anna Mumford, and I am the cybersecurity consultant at CONNSTEP, who is the Connecticut MEP Center, the Manufacturer Extension Partnership. We are part of a national network sponsored and facilitated by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which means that there is MEP Center in each of the states throughout the United States, as you can see in here. Our mission is to support the manufacturers right here in Connecticut, where my role is to assist manufacturers by helping them with regulatory cybersecurity compliance assessments and guiding their cybersecurity implementation initiatives. Your presenter today also is Dave Long. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Cage Data. Cage Data is the managed security service provider helping businesses navigate the issues of IT and cybersecurity compliance. Dave manages IT and OT environments for businesses across the state of Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey. And finally, we have Eric Bell presenting as well. Eric is the sales engineer at Obscura. Obscura is an international organization providing unique and cost-effective solutions for OT and industrial control systems security. Eric is the network engineer with the expertise and experience in OT and IT environments, securing security best practices. And now I am going to pass the slides to Eric. Eric? Eric, you are muted, just so you know.
My apologies. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction, Anna. As Anna said, I'm a sales engineer with Obscura. And just in case you guys don't know what a sales engineer is, I'm basically a network engineer that went over to the dark side and decided to start selling stuff. It's a wonderful, wonderful job. As Anna said, my part of my background is designing and securing OT networks. So this topic is very, very near and dear to me. One of the things that we're looking at here is, as we know, industrial cyber is experiencing incredible growth in the market over the past couple of years. And a lot of this is because of a lot of the actions that we've seen by bad actors in recent times. Like you see here that I've got, we all remember Colonial Pipeline that caused a lot of headache here for folks in the U.S. and around the world. A couple of them were recently the attacks that we've seen overseas. Now, why are these happening? A lot of it is because there's been three fundamental shifts in the OT and IT industry. We've been transitioning from historically air-gapped networks to networks where everything is working together. Cloud-based systems are talking to OT-based systems for management and so on and so forth. Well, this digitalization brings with it a lot of new cyber risks because OT networks are historically have not been designed for security, right? So basically, the CIA triad has been flipped upside down. The focus has been more on accessibility instead of security. And this leads to a lot of theft, disruption of data, and pretty significant impact to operations and safety. Next slide, please. So successful hacks are, they're exponentially increasing on ICS systems. And this is all across different verticals, from gas and oil to, again, notably in the news, electric and other utility distributions. So when there's an attack in the IT world, you might lose data, right? There might be some encryption going on. You might have some ransomware. In the OT world, when there's an attack, things might go boom, right? People might get hurt, plants might get destroyed, hardware systems might get destroyed. This is one of the reasons why there's been such an explosion in the security industry. As you can see here, from 2010 until now, we've seen at the very least 140% of increase in these different attacks. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, all of these interconnections between legacy systems and new systems, new being cloud-based, they've increased the risk pretty significantly. So what this does is it shows that there's a value in boosting the security for the new industrial transition. So just in case some of you aren't familiar with Industry 4.0, this is the latest and greatest transition in manufacturing and maintenance technologies. So, we had the transition from coal powered systems and so on and so forth. And then recently to more data management oriented, and now to connect it to the cloud. So hence Industry 4.0. Next slide, please. So what this means with all the new interconnections, this means that people are kind of caught in a dilemma. What is an attack going to do to your operations? Is it going to destroy valuable data? Is it going to harm people? So the certainty of this downtime often leads to the decision to either upgrade your networks or implement different cybersecurity solutions. But oftentimes, as the slide shows, the cure is worse than the disease, because with OT systems, they quite often can't be patched. Maybe it's because the systems are so ancient that there's not one available, or downtime required for these patches would be exponentially expensive for the owners. Next slide, please. Speaking of aged infrastructure, so in my experience working with old systems, it is, again, quite often expensive, prohibitively expensive, if not impossible, to upgrade and patch. So there are a lot of different systems that have been developed, hence the boom in the cybersecurity industry, to address this problem. Next slide, please.
Yeah,
My friend Dave is going to jump in here and give me a hand with explaining some more of the automation design constraints.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so as Anna mentioned earlier, I am the Chief Technology Officer for Cage Data, managed service provider here in Connecticut. I'm sitting right down in Wallingford, just north of New Haven. And I work with customers all the time across both manufacturing sectors as well as in office spaces and things like that. And one of the most common approaches I've seen to businesses that want to implement OT security, want to make that shift towards Industry 4.0, where we have a need for connecting to the cloud now. One of the most common approaches I see is to simply take our IT security policies. They work for us as we connect our office systems to the cloud. So let's just place those in the OT sector as well. Let's just put those on the plant floor for the equipment down there. But as Eric mentioned, the world runs on aging infrastructure. And whereas in an office, we might have systems that are 3 to 5 years old, maybe 7 years old, and those systems run, modern operating systems, Windows 10, Windows 11, maybe, Mac or modern Linux operating system. On the plant floor, it's incredibly commonplace to see, systems that are 20 years old. In some cases, I've seen, CNC mills that are 30 years old and have a Windows 95 or Windows NT embedded workstation within them. And, so we have this issue of how do we secure a 20, 30-year-old operating system running within a $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 piece of equipment that can't be replaced easily. That's the next slide, Anna. So we run into this issue where vulnerabilities are discovered on the IT side. We just saw this last week. Cisco released CVE, actually I think 2 or 3 CVEs. They discovered the 0-day. They released a patch within a week, and I imagine most businesses, now have either deployed that patch or have in their schedule to deploy that patch to their Cisco firewall devices. On the OT side of things, when we're looking at a Windows 95 machine, if we discover a vulnerability, whether or not that gets patched is a question. Whether or not it ever gets patched is a question. But also the risk of deploying that patch when it is available. As Eric mentioned, in the IT side, when something goes wrong, a system, goes down. On the OT side, when something goes wrong, things can go boom. And so we have to start thinking in terms of how do we deal with a system that may never get a patch applied? And if it does get a patch applied, it may be months to years before we actually apply that patch. And this is not to say we shouldn't apply patches when they're available, but it's simply that we have to start thinking differently about how we're going to strategize around that, we patch our systems on the first Tuesday of every month no longer necessarily works. And instead, we have to think about, we're going to install these patches after they've gone through many cycles of testing. And so we need to start securing our networks at different layers than necessarily at the endpoint level. You can go to the next slide, Anna. Right, so why is this all so hard? As we talked about, these sorts of systems, when something goes wrong, something can go boom. But also, in most cases, OT was not built with security in the minds of the developers. They were thinking about, how do we get this laser cutter to do cuts? How do we get this calibration machine to calibrate? They weren't thinking about, how do we make sure that this is going to run a secure protocol for accessing files. And the developers out there, many times we're dealing with different OEMs, multiple OEMs across the plant floor, supporting different devices. And we're also looking at, a new way of thinking about vulnerabilities where it's not necessarily something that is going to get patched. And so how do we manage the attack surface as a whole instead of managing our updates, our endpoints, and looking beyond that to the rest of the network? So one of the first questions I always ask clients when I'm working with is, one, do you have an inventory of what assets are on the network? And two, do you segment out your networks? Do you have a different OT network for your plant floor versus your IT network? And do you have a document that defines every sort of protocol that's talking through from, your CNC mail accessing programs on a file server somewhere else? These questions are oftentimes the starting point to all of this. And once we get there, we can start to build a picture of what we need to do with our environments. You can go to the next slide, Anna. Right. So, taking it a step further as to why we aren't doing this in a lot of manufacturing centers is because of this idea that if it's not broken, don't fix it. Right. We made the shift to Industry 3.0. As Eric said, Industry 4.0 is starting to incorporate the cloud and a lot of additional intelligence on the data coming from our plant. Industry 3.0 is introducing more automation in our plants, introducing robots to actually do the work for us. And so we've implemented that, and it all seems to be working. So why fix it? But the problem is, we are ever increasing our dependency on the cloud. And so we have these spots that are opened up, and that starts to ask the question of, so what if we do get ransomware? And, somebody may respond with, that'll stop the plant for a week. It's okay. We might have to pay, a couple $1,000s. That's, it's acceptable risk when the other side of the equation is redesigning my network, re-inventorying everything, going through and building all new processes. So how are we actually going to move this forward, move this process of implementing some of these cybersecurity processes, procedures? Where do we get started? And Anna, you can go to the next slide. Right. So, we want to move to the mentality of, yes, we want to improve the resilience in the plant. We want to improve, our workflows, our trust in the network. And this is not something that we haven't done before as a manufacturing industry. Throughout the latter half of the 20th century, we saw lean manufacturing enter in and start to take hold, where our approach to it was to stand on the shoulders of giants. We looked at the companies that were doing manufacturing in new ways, and we took their approaches and we incorporated them into, from companies like Toyota into our small shops or mid-sized manufacturing shops to incorporate lean manufacturing into the picture. And we're going to do the same thing as we move into now this new process where we can leverage the tools out there that have been built and add in additional pieces that we're going to use for our individual needs. But this isn't something we have to go about alone. We have groups like CONNSTEP and NIST that are already working on helping manufacturing in this. We have systems like what Obscura does for getting insight into our environments. So to rebalance the equation of how do we actually move into this, how do we get out of the mentality that the cure is worse than the disease, is to look at what other people are doing and how they're doing it, and make use of the tools that are out there in the industry for us. And now I'll turn it over to Anna, who will talk a little bit about some of how we can actually make use of those tools.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. I often work with small, medium-sized manufacturers who share with me their stories of cybersecurity attacks and the devastating effect that those have on their companies and the bottom line. And so I can definitely testify that the threat is very real, and the impact on those organizations it's quite high. So let me talk a little bit from the aspect, maybe take a step back and talk from the aspect of cybersecurity standards and frameworks, as Dave just mentioned, that are out there that might be helpful, and some of the regulations that are coming in place, already are in place. So in 2022, the manufacturing sector became the #1 target for cybersecurity attacks, accounting for nearly 25% of all attacks across all industries worldwide. And this is mainly due to the manufacturers' increasing reliance on interconnected industrial systems, smart technologies, and adoption of digital transformation. So as the attack vector expands, the cybersecurity becomes vitally important. According to the Bureau of Industry and Security, 99% of all manufacturers in the US are small, medium-sized manufacturers, and yet 50% of those lack basic security controls, just like both Dave and Eric mentioned. That means that the national security of our country is at risk. Think of critical infrastructure, food and automotive industries, fuel and medical sectors, just to mention few. Let's talk about the US defense industrial base sector. As I mentioned, about 99% of manufacturers are small and medium, and which means that 99% of all DoD designs, makes, and uses come from small and medium manufacturers. And yet the majority of those are widely unprotected and lack basic security safeguards. This diminishes the US military capabilities and the ability for our country to defend itself, which our adversaries exploit for geopolitical impact and economic gains to reshape the balance of power. So in response, many organizations, as well as the federal and local governments, take steps to protect our manufacturers and the critical infrastructure. And many standards, frameworks, and regulations have been created. Some listed in here are the ISO 27001, which contains the standards for managing information security and was created by the International Organization for Standardization. They are also well known for creating the ISO 9001 quality management systems. Many of manufacturers are already familiar with that. There's also NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is an agency of the United States Department of Commerce. They have developed the cybersecurity framework, which is or became a golden standard adopted by many industries and countries throughout the world. They have created many publications, guidelines for specific technologies and frameworks that are freely available on their website. There are also many regulations, just like the DFARS regulation, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. They adapted one of the NIST frameworks, the NIST Special Publication A171, that are required. All of the DoD contractor and subcontractors are required to adapt and implement to be compliant with the regulations. And again, they have many frameworks that are available that organization can adapt. There's a framework for OT, for small business, and things like that. There's also, you may have heard of the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Rule that is been in works for years, but now it has been published and is expected to come into effect the first quarter of 2025. There's also a lot of many different data classifications and regulations that are wrapped around that to safeguard that data, such as ITAR, CUI, the controlled and classified information that falls under the DFARS regulations. There is FCI, federal contract information, things like CTI, control technical information, export control information, PII, personally identifiable information, and there's much more. So there are again regulations around that, and some frameworks may address those specifically. So all of those standards and frameworks have one thing in common, which is they are all risk-based. It means that you as an organization need to analyze and understand the specific risks each of your OT processes throughout the organization may have, and then apply the standards and implement effective controls to sufficiently protect the OT processes based on the risk sensitivity level and the business continuity requirements of each of the OT processes. Next, you will periodically test if those controls are still operating as expected, and if there are perhaps new vulnerabilities that may arise and that they need to be addressed. And finally, you would monitor for possible security incidents and have maybe an internal capability to be able to respond to incidents and then recover from them, have actually a plan to recover from them. So on this slide, we have a representation of the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is the 2.0 framework, the updated one, which shows the 5 steps I just loosely described, which is the first step is identify. You, as Dave and both Eric mentioned, you need to identify what assets you have, not just the IT assets, but it's especially in manufacturing, it's critically important to identify all the assets that are critical to the mission of your organization. That includes OT processes as well, your facilities, your personnel. Next step, the second step is protect, which means implement security protections and to safeguard those assets. The third step is detect, performing a regular risk assessment, managing those risks, and maybe doing some type of monitoring. All of those will allow you to detect if there are any suspicious or unauthorized activities happening. And then you would respond with incident response plan and have a plan to actually recover from any possible incidents. Now, the updated 2.0 framework added a 6th function to the framework, which is governance. And this is a critically important, and which enforces the organization to have an oversight or overarching strategy for risk management, the responsibility and authorities within the organization, the creating policies and procedures, having an oversight and management of the suppliers or the supply chain of the manufacturers. So legacy OT technologies have its own challenges, as both Eric and Dave mentioned, and they are difficult to safeguard for organizations. Even if the organization tries to follow a cybersecurity framework, best practices, the options are usually limited. They are often expensive or not sufficient, and there is a shortage of cybersecurity professionals with the necessary expertise in OT security. I am going to now pass to Dave. The next slide. Dave?
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so, as Anna talked about with the cybersecurity framework, one of the major components of it is getting getting visibility into what's happening on your environment, what's happening across the network, on your endpoints. And this is not anything new in the OT side. This is, we needed visibility on the IT side, but one of the things that tends to happen on the IT side is we get a lot of our information from the endpoint themselves, the individual computers, the individual servers, things like that. And you can go to the next slide. Whereas in OT, oftentimes that's not possible. Our data comes from the very low levels of our plants, individual equipment. And this equipment is usually, as we talked about, built on legacy, network equipment, built in legacy operating systems, and not really built with monitoring in mind. So we are, looking at trying to gather data, identify the outliers, and this graph alone is one thing that a lot of companies don't necessarily have their manufacturing equipment on that network graph. We'll see all their network switches, firewalls, everything like that. But once we're down into the that lowest layer, that device network, how do we get the data from there? Anna, you can go to the next slide. And this is where so this is where some of the tools come into place that we can leverage for this. You can skip forward. And one more time. Right. So, one of the ways that we can do this, and this is, part of what Obscura's tooling is doing, is helping to get insights from the very low levels of our networks without having to, replace the embedded systems within our machines, and get discovery into things like, if we have this Windows 95 embedded system, it uses SMB v1 to access its programs. This is something I see pretty commonly. So from the IT side, we'd want to patch that. We'd want to get that updated so we don't have a old broken version of the SMB protocol in use. On the OT side, that's not as much of an option. And so we need to instead look at the data that comes in from the network itself and start to look at how can we secure this. Well, we know that this machine is going to use an old protocol, and we know that it uses it to talk to one server that's in our operational network higher up on the stack. And so we can start to then take the network as a whole and build rules around, this machine's allowed to do that. But now we can create the rule that says no other machine can use, an old broken protocol. So we start to shift towards securing our across the network as opposed to trying to just secure through individual endpoints on the network.
Dave, if you don't mind, I'd like to step in just here real quick. For y'all that aren't 100% familiar with Obscura and what we do and what you're looking at, so Obscura is a solution that operates on layer 2 of the network. So it does not impede any traffic. It doesn't slow anything down. And as a matter of fact, it has a really great feature, one that's kind of near and dear to my heart: fails open, right? So if it loses power, there's no break in connectivity. The main goal for our solution is to secure communications between all of these different areas and to help you segment the network. So if you take a look at the devices on the bottom screen at the device level and at layer 1 of the OSI model, normally what people will deploy is a firewall and some other solutions to block traffic. And this kind of thing might slow down some time-sensitive protocols that may stop machines from running. So what our solution does is transparently blocks machines that you don't want to talk to this. So, for example, if you didn't want your robots down there on the bottom left to be able to talk out to something in corporate land, we transparently block that. Kind of like a transparent firewall where the network only sees us as a bump on the line. Another thing that we can do, talking about visibility, is instead of implementing a very expensive and quite frankly dangerous solution that will reach out and ping or query devices, we can send span port traffic to that monitoring solution. So what this does is it saves the business money on deploying sensors. and saves the business money on it, so where you only have to have one piece of the monitoring solution. Go ahead, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And you could step to the next slide. So, ultimately what, Eric and Obscura's platform is doing, and what our goal here is to, get this data into our system, be able to action it, and ultimately, because unfortunately it's not a question of if we ever get attacked, if we ever have, an issue, it's going to be ultimately when. What we can start to do is move towards making it quicker to respond to an issue that comes up, deliver fewer false positives on those sorts of things, and ultimately to reduce the amount of labor in responding and recovering from an incident that arises. It's ultimately the goal is, to not have an incident. And that's a wonderful dream, but I am a big proponent of, hope for the best and plan for the worst. So that's, ultimately what we're trying to do when we gather in all this information, when we start to look at our networks as a whole instead of individual endpoints, individual pieces. We start to build this picture that can tell us stories about what's happening, and then we can figure out when things break out of the baseline of what's happening, and respond and recover from when those incidents come up that break out of the baseline. And so I'll turn it over to Eric again to talk a little bit more about, how do we look at this from the business perspective.
Thanks, Dave. So what we're seeing is the difference between purchase costs and hidden cost, right? Everyone understands total cost of ownership, but time to value can vary. So what I mean is, if you are purchasing a very expensive IDS, for example, it may take a little while for you to realize the time to value, because you have to take into account a lot of different characteristics of it. There's part of the hidden costs in securing an OT network is, as you can see, planning network changes, right? That's engineering time, modifications, downtime, so on and so forth. This can get very, very expensive very, very fast, especially because a lot of these things require plant downtime. And as I'm sure all of you know, the plant downtime can run from a couple $100,000 an hour to upwards of six figures. One of the examples that we have over here on the right side of the screen is there was a quote for a rather large paper company to segment their network and bolster the protection. Well, the quote was $1 million for the price of just the installation, and downtime was estimated to be somewhere in weeks to months. So the answer was unequivocally no, because we can all agree that that's just nuts. Can we go to the next slide, please? So taking a look at some of the things that can be done to reduce the potential costs of ownership or the potential expenses for introducing a security product, is to take a look at some of these issues that you might not think about right off the bat. Like I mentioned, network changes, that requires downtime. Third-party software changes also causes downtime. Kind of see where I'm going here, lots of downtime. One of the things that we could help you out with is we sit in line with your sensitive devices and don't modify network traffic. What this helps you to do is capture traffic in line. So with a lot of aging infrastructures, there aren't network switches that allow for span or mirror ports, right, to capture the data. There also may not be the ability to transport such large amount of data across that network. So a solution like ours can remedy that by transferring sending that data, collecting that data and sending it upstream and compressing it to roughly 90%. So instead of having double the network traffic, which is what a span port can do for you, we have the ability to reduce that by a significant amount. So what this does is it gives you the segmentation of your network without modifying the network architecture. Gives you visibility into the network without incurring a significant cost from, say, an IDS or another solution. And it can help you to identify the different assets and communication protocols used on your network. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example of one of the ways that we've deployed is we had recently had an asset owner for some critical infrastructure. They couldn't really modify the network, and they couldn't grab traffic the way they needed. So we were able to deploy within a few minutes and secure their network, helping them segment it. And we were able to collect data on all of their devices and all of their network infrastructure within a couple of hours. And this was all done for a very nominal fee. So saving tons and tons of money and tons of time, because as we all know, doing things like this requires boots on the ground time, right? The less boots on the ground time, the better. Next one, please. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Another one that we've recently, whoa, too far. Sorry. Another one that we recently did was we had the opportunity to help secure the network of a water and wastewater management facility in a medium-sized municipality. As with most companies operating in the OT realm, they didn't know what was on their network, and they were having issues with identifying security risks and vulnerabilities. We were able to deploy within about 20 minutes, and from there it only took 15 minutes to discover hundreds of devices on their network and quite a few that they didn't even know were out there. We immediately, as you can see, increased their security posture. My little quip down there in the bottom about we found the right cable to unplug. There was a couple of devices that were like shadow IT. We were able to just pull the plug and right away increase security. Next slide, please. And Anna, I'll pass this one off to you.
I think I'm forwarding one more, correct, Dave?
Yeah, so we can, just on that last slide, talking about, partnering togetherness and how do we, the starting point for a lot of us. This isn't something that we, are going to do alone. This is something that with, groups like CONNSTEP and the what they're delivering for customers, what Obscura and Eric are delivering for customers, and what my goal is for customers is being able to work together and collaborate on how we actually move forward with all of this. And here is just some questions to get started on moving the thought process on where are you at on your OT cybersecurity right now. Some things to think about as you are getting started on it. Things like, as I said, the first question I'm going to ask anybody is, do you segment your network and do you have an inventory of everything happening? Does that network inventory also include your conversations on the network, your protocols in use? What is the expected traffic for everything? How much of your network is being encrypted? Are you, collecting that network traffic and feeding it into a visibility tool? Are you implementing things like zero trust across even your OT network, treating every device as if it's something, that you do not trust that device? It's no longer at the edge of the network; it's now within the network. Looking at the questions about log collection, having a dedicated team who's working on this sort of stuff. These are important questions to ask as you get started on this. And it's certainly something that whether it's Anna, myself, or Eric, that you can reach out to us and we can help you start to answer some of these questions for your own businesses.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And a lot of this kind of helps with the transition between IT and OT, because quite a lot of the questions that are asked are specifically aimed at IT, right? Zero trust, network traffic, that kind of thing. And OT folks may not 100% understand or have the experience in what you're asking. So like Dave said, that's where our partnership comes into play, because we can explain both and kind of help you to understand what needs to be done to secure both of your IT and OT networks.
Absolutely. And right here on the slide, I just went straight to the last slide. You do have our contact information. This is not an easy topic. I know a lot of my clients struggle with it. So my understanding is that if you have an issue, there's probably a lot of a journey in front of you, and perhaps a lot of conversation moving forward. So please feel free to contact either one of us. You can also go to the CONNSTEP website and fill up a form over there, and we'll definitely connect you with the right person on our team, whether it's Dave or Eric, somebody from Eric's organization. So again, please reach out. We'll be happy to help you. Now, Lauren, do we have any questions?
We currently do not have any questions, Anna.
Okay, perfect. Are there any final thoughts from either one of you? Or I know we have also Brian online. I don't know if you, Brian, you would like to chime in with the final thoughts. We also have, so Brian, it's from Obscura, and we have Jeff Orszak from CONNSTEP online as well. Please.
Hey, everybody. Happy to say a couple words. I'm Brian. I'm the CEO of Obscura. I think at the end of the day, when you look at all this stuff, you probably ask yourself, well, why? Why do I want to do this? Security is an extra thing I have to manage. It's a cost. And I think one of the nice things about what Eric and David have shared is that you can actually get money back in your business by doing this correctly. You can extend the value of a capital asset that you might have to replace because it's running an older version of Windows, or you just help with plant resilience, and you're going to budget for having to take the plant offline for whatever the reason is. But through good planning with a firm like Cage Data and using a simple overlay platform like Obscura, you can avoid plant downtime. And if your plant's running quite frequently, shutting the plant down costs you money. So my hope is you take away from this webinar that you can implement cybersecurity to help you save money. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Brian. Perfect. So if there is no other comments, just so you know, Lauren put our contact information, our email addresses in a website for Obscura, Cage Data, and CONNSTEP in the, I believe this is in the chat window. So you can just copy that and keep it for your reference for later. And if there are no other questions or not other comments, thank you so much for your attention. And we hope to hear from you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice day.